Good afternoon on what is a warm, bright and sunny day. It is Sunday the 19th of March, Mother's Day here in the UK, and I'm in the read nook with a nice hot cup of tea. And a package to unbox. So let's find out what I've got in here. Go. Slices open easily enough. And what I have is this, which is a copy of White Dwarf number 3. This is the earliest copy of White Dwarf that I own. It was published in November 1977, when I was 10 and before I got into gaming. Back when the magazine itself cost 50p, and this is very much going to look likely to cost you, well, if you were multiply the $1.50 price by 100, that might give you an idea of how much you might want, what might pay for this at a bare minimum. These 40-year-old magazines do get very expensive if you are trying to collect them. So, White Dwarf number 3, science fiction and fantasy games magazine, and in this issue is solo dungeon mapping, a do-it-yourself guide, colour Conan's Thews, figure painting hints, and more. But it's relatively slim from what it ultimately became in terms of role-playing through to the late 80s, to the point where it switched over to focusing just purely on Games Workshop and Citadel Miniatures content. And this is not a perfect copy. There's a bit of repair work done, and it's very unlikely you're going to find copies in good condition these days. But anyway, we open up, and of course we've got some adverts. And the great thing about looking at the adverts of these early magazines is really capturing the culture and feel for the gaming hobby at the time. So we've got an advert for Ralph Arthur Miniatures, a seller of Ralph Arthur Miniatures, Wellington's House of Games. Wellington actually existed back there, and they did a science fiction combat game, starship game called 4000 AD, which I remember from back in the day but never played. Tally Ho Games, which is actually based in North Finchley, London. So it's, you wonder whether, you know, at a precursor potentially there to Leisure Games. And shops in Games of Liverpool there as well. You know, actually, you'll see adverts in White Dwarf for that again, over and over, and it has its own sort of almost legend in the hobby. And certainly, if you lived in Liverpool and wanted to go sort of like buy your games, you would go to Games of Liverpool. So let's have a look. So you've got the editorial by Ian Livingstone, and then we have Roger Moore's solo dungeon mapping. Okay, which provides the means and maps for you to, map solo dungeons. And solo dungeon play has sort of been part of the hobby really ever since the Dungeon Master's Guide came out for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. That was 1979, so it was 2 years away from this. So this would have been an alternative. And here we have sort of like a crossover, probably between, Roger Moore's. I wonder if that's the same author, Roger Moore as the editor of Dragon for many years. Fred Hemmings looks further at competitive Dungeons and Dragons. And the thing is, one of the things that you've always told about role-playing games is they're not competitive, they're cooperative, you work together. But there is the one aspect of the hobby which is competitive. If you look at, certainly tournament play is one of the areas where Dungeons & Dragons is competitive. Generally not between players, but between playing groups. So you, it's not untypical for you sort of like for groups to go in and play one big dungeon, and that same dungeon or adventure will be run again and again to see how many points they scored, and then they would go through to the next round and so on. And a lot of the early scenarios published by TSR would have been tournament adventures. For example, A1 to 4, Scourge of the Slave Lords. That series began as a series of tournament adventures. So we've got rules here for competitive D&D scoring and that sort of thing. And that ends there. And then we've got a very short news section. You know, the hobby wasn't particularly necessarily active at the time when there wasn't a lot going on. So, you know, got games here. Will soon be arriving in the country from TSR, include a revised D&D set, which include a rules booklet with levels 1 to 3. Legions of the Petal Throne, set of miniatures rules for the role-playing game. From Game Designers Workshop, there's Travel, a science fiction role-playing simmering concept and format to D&D. Well, we know how that's not necessarily the case, but again, they wouldn't necessarily know, but you've got a selection of interesting bits and pieces in terms of news and so on. And then again, here at the bottom, we've got this year saw more people attending Gen Con than Origins. Daily attendance for Gen Con at the time was 2,000. And British gamers have a chance to beat this record high at Games Day 3 at Seymour Hall, Seymour Place, London, on Saturday, 7th of December 1977. So 2,000 for Gen Con back in 1977. Not the case now. You are talking tens of thousands now. Absolutely fantastic. So, if you ever get a chance to go to Gen Con, it's an amazing experience. So, Don Turnbull continues the Monster Mark system. It is, it's sort of like to determine, how can I put it, a challenge level for your monsters, and how much to reward your players for defeating them, and how much how much treasure to give them. And this is written by Tom Turnbull, who is a leading figure of note in the early hobby here in the UK. Notably, he ran TSR UK for several years. He was a big contributor to White Dwarf, and of course the Fiend Folio is he's the man behind the Fiend Folio, and of course the first UK Dungeons and Dragons scenario from TSR, which was U1, Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh with David Brown. But before that, he was big in the play-by-mail community for diplomacy and similar games. And then his Monster Mark system was, his big contribution to White Dwarf back in the day. I don't know that anyone would ever want to use this now. 40 years ago, back in our youth, we had time to look into this. We had time to dig into this and really go through and see how it worked. So we also have Open Box. Open Box was White Dwarf's review section. So we've got reviews here of Judges Guild, playing aids, ready reference sheets, tack cards, dungeon shields, Tegel Manor, City State of the Overlord. Tegel Manor would have been £3.50 back then. City State of the Infant Overlord would have been £6.50, and you're going, oh god, I wish I, give me, here's my money now. I will buy those if I could. But again, they would have been a lot. There would have been a lot of money back in those days. It was not. We look at those prices, but remember, they're expensive. So you've got quite an extensive section of Judges Guild items being reviewed there. And then we have Citadel, a fantasy board game, followed by Fourth Dimension, which is another board game, Battle of the Five Armies, TSR hobbies. Again, mixture of board games, very few role-playing games. It's sort of like I say, beyond the Judges Guild there, obviously coming into the UK at the moment, and just it's sort of a reminder of just how few role-playing games there were back in the day. These days, yeah. When we have D&D campaigns by Lewis Pulsifer, who is best known as a board game designer. Britannia, the board game, I believe, is his, and he's still active in talking about game design these days, and he is talking about D&D campaigns. And he would contribute several philosophy articles throughout the early days of White Dwarf, and they're really good reads because a lot of the advice is still going today. Then we have the article, colouring Conan's Thews, which is a guide to painting miniatures. Using the oil paints, water-soluble paints, brushes, and so on. And it's important to remember just how the early hobby was linked to the use of miniatures. It's not that the hobby at this point is for you. I keep going back to this. It's 1977. The hobby is 3 years old, and it's really very much derived from wargaming. So if you're role-playing, it's not that much different. It's not necessarily that different to the idea of wargaming. So you need miniatures, you want to paint them, and there's constant advice in White Dwarf on how to paint miniatures, where to start, what to buy, backed up with occasionally with some decent photographs, but in the early days, quite awful photography. You're not really able to see very much. And then we have Treasure Chest, which is a big section of. You see this thing? We have another Treasure Chest. We have an advert for at Metagaming Concepts Ogre Micro Game #1. For Game Centre in Kingston upon Thames, but I mean, and that cost £1.95. Treasure Chest, which is basically was the department for readers' contributions. So we have a quicker, dirty alternative to the Assassin class. Assassin class introduced in Blackmore. Andy Holt's got the Law Master Avalon, which is describing the author's game there. Got some puzzles, some new magic rooms. We've got advert for Games Day, which takes Britain's premier games convention, which was mentioned earlier on. And then letters there to the editor, and we've got a very small classified section and a help section, followed by a big advert for Games Workshop and what it sells there. I mean, this would have been the premier outlet for games at the time, and there's a lot here you kind of go, yeah, I wish I could get hold of that these days, and especially pay those prices. So yeah, that's White Dwarf #3. Well, someday I do actually plan to actually probably dig into these and read these and properly review them, but not yet. It's going to take a bit of time to get to. Got to try and track down issues 1 and 2, let alone issues 4 through 8, I believe. But I do plan at some point to look at the best of articles. Hopefully this year in 2023. Anyway, thanks again for watching another unboxing in the Nook. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, do please click on the like button down below, and of course if you've got any comments or feedback, I do appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to more unboxings in the Nook, where you'll see me out here with a package containing a book or game, or in this case a magazine, which I will unbox and test back to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 10 minutes or so, all of course accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea, then please do hit the subscribe button down below. Thanks again for watching another unboxing in the Nook. I'll be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.